Hello, everybody. We're here to delve further into, coaching and, how you get into coaching, what is coaching, how do I improve as a player with former XL2 and, pretty extensively veteranized coach ioStux. How you doing?
I'm doing very, very, very well. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, no worries. So I did want to kind of get, let's start at the beginning, right? Let's start at, your history and what I would assume you're probably most known for is coaching, players that who are just looking to improve. So I wanted to kind of get your take on some of the things that people seem to really have a thirst for, and something that you seem to be repeating yourself on. What are some of those big topics that seem to be always reoccurring with these players?
Well, the majority of questions that I get are just people trying to come up with new stuff that's holding them back, that
Mm,
doesn't actually involve, putting in any effort. Sort of people are complaining about, can you tell me if my mouse is holding me back? Should I get a 140 hertz monitor? Is it possible to climb at 60 FPS? Is my sensitivity optimal? And a lot of that stuff. And it's
mm,
very boring because the answer is always the same. No, none of those things are really, the main reason that you're struggling. And you need to look for, other things, more important things, your understanding of the game mostly. So I would say that's the main thing that I have to deal with. Um, but I've gotten better at quickly dealing with those cases and just kind of telling them, come back to me when you actually have a good question to ask. And overall, I think that has improved my quality of life quite significantly because, for one, the overall amount of questions and clients that I get has decreased since
mm,
I've put less effort into answering low effort questions. And that allows me to put more time into the good questions, give,
gotcha.
really nice in depth answers and kind of, grow as a coach as well because you don't really learn a whole lot as a coach if all you do every single day is just tell people, you know, that their mouse pad isn't really a bottleneck.
It that is kind of surprising now that you mention it, that comes up as often as it does, because it does seem pretty popular within the streaming community, and even in the Overwatch League. They have the peripheral setups, and like, oh, this is how you play like Surefour, or oh, this is
Mm-hmm.
this is the settings and stuff. So does it seem like there's kind of a shortcut kind of vibe there with a lot of this stuff, where they think that, like,
Yeah,
if I play like Flower, then you know maybe I can get pro or whatever.
I mean, it's obviously hard to explain because you need to understand the game. It's
Mm,
kind of most players just don't know the game at all. Like they don't know anything about it. Um, and if you don't know all of those things, the only thing that everyone understands is, put your crosshair on the target.
right.
And then they think about, that's the only thing that I understand. How can I get more efficient doing that? And obviously, before I put any actual effort into practice and just playing the game, I need to make sure that my setup is optimal. Um, and yeah, as I said, it's very boring, and I think that a lot of YouTubers and even Overwatch itself is very kind of smart in
Mm-hmm.
that they abuse the fact that a lot of people look for that, and I think that's why they put so much emphasis on that. And even when you look at pro players coaching, recently Soon started kind of advertising his own coaching a little bit.
Mm.
Um, Even he mentioned right at the start, the stuff that we're going over. How can you make your setup the way that Overwatch League players have it set up and all of that stuff. And I'm pretty sure that Soon knows that, if you're in silver, it doesn't really matter what
Mm.
angle your keyboard is at, but people are gonna suck it up and they're gonna end up paying. And that's, I think, just the unfortunate reality. But really, the only players that do actually get better are the players that realize that there are no shortcuts. It doesn't
Mm.
really matter if you have a $30 mouse or a $150 mouse. It just comes down to practice and thinking about the game and getting smarter over time.
That makes a lot of sense, especially, I've liked to say that I've watched a fair deal of esports over my time here. Obviously, Overwatch being, my big game at the moment, but looking to improve myself, and looking at some of the coaching sites back in the day for like League of Legends and even StarCraft. Was there anybody that you kind of saw and was like, oh, I could probably do that with this game or that game? Was there anybody that really kind of inspired you in that sense?
That was actually another lot of people know about that. He's called LS. I think that stands for
Last Shadow.
Lost Shadow.
Something
Last
like
Shadow.
that.
Yeah, yeah, something like that. Yeah. Most people just know him under LS. And he was kind of mysterious to me. Like I never really knew like what he was doing, how the coaching thing worked. And it wasn't really super professional either. But you know, I kind of wanted to be like him when Overwatch came out. I kind of wanted to be the LS of Overwatch, so to say. And I do proudly say that, you know, yes, I have become the LS of Overwatch. You know, I don't offer, you know, coaching in Korea for $4,000 yet, and probably never will. But, you know, other than that, I think that I've kind of, you know, established myself in terms of private coaching, at least, as kind of the, you know, it's pricey, but it's, you know, it's kind of like red cameras, those super expensive cameras. It's you know, they cost $28,000, but you know that if you get one, you know that's like the best stuff that you
Exactly.
And you know, some camera enthusiast out there is gonna tell me that, you know, red cameras are trash, but you know, just follow along with the analogy.
No, it's exactly who I kind of had in mind when, you know, I first started talking to you and we did that interview. You know, it came across, or the coaching came across in that similar vein where it was like, all right, guys, there is no shortcuts here. You just have to put in the work. You just have to, you know, really study and really grind in that kind of tough love atmosphere. So that was someone who I definitely kind of tied with your kind of brand of coaching. And I thought that was really, really interesting. And I had a hint that maybe you had seen LS before, but I wanted to clarify. So that's really cool though, because I like LS and he's very, very intelligent. So coming from you know the personal coaching atmosphere, you've climbed the ranks through the open division. Was that kind of a similar thing where you felt like you had to reiterate yourself a lot, or was that a little bit better? Were you starting to find
That was way easier.
Okay.
To be honest, it's okay. So I was surprised by how many people in, you know, tier 3 still were focusing a lot of on sensitivity and peripherals and stuff. I expected that to be the point where that doesn't really matter. But there were, you know, obviously all of them were DPS players. You know, tank and support players, they were kind of past that phase and they realized that it doesn't really matter. But there were some DPS players that were still a little bit too focused on that. But the majority of them, you know, it was a lot easier to work with because they kind of realized that it really doesn't matter what sense they use and, you know, what kind of mouse they use, as long as it's not super unusable. If your mouse just, you know, stops working every 3 seconds for a second, then, you know, you might want to replace that. But, you know, anything past that they can work with. So yeah, transitioning to teams, I just realized that was the next logical step, because after a while, you know, a lot of people always think that, you know, I'm kind of living the dream, because at this point I'm charging like quite a significant amount for coaching. I'm in the $175 an hour range now. And, you know, a lot of people think that's great. You know, you just shout at someone for an hour and you get, you know, money. But after a while, it doesn't really matter how much you make. It just gets, you know, it's just not as fulfilling. And you don't really feel like you're going in. Like that's not something you want to do until you know, grow old and retire. And so I figured, you know, I could do that, but at the same time, I could also focus on coaching teams, because that would kind of push the limits and you would be forced to kind of learn a lot. And I don't regret that at all. I think that since I started coaching teams, I know so many more things. And that's also one of the reasons why I feel comfortable charging, you know, these amounts for my own private coaching, because I know how much I've learned over the last year, and I value my, like, all of the time that I've spent collecting all of this experience very highly. So yeah, I think they go kind of hand in hand. Definitely the team coaching more to kind of develop as a coach and learn new things, and the private coaching to, you know, spread that knowledge with everyone who wants to and who can afford it, and also just to, you know, have some financial stability, especially during current times where, you know, sometimes it can be a little bit rougher staying afloat in the company.
No, it makes a complete and utter sense, especially when you look at, you know, how you know, what you're worth and what you can charge, what you feel comfortable with charging. That really makes a lot of sense. Because you, like you said, I can't imagine that, you know, if you find it pretty difficult, or I would imagine, right, you'd find it difficult going from being a player coach, specifically an individual level, like working on, you know, those set of skills, and then going into a team, and that's a whole, it feels like from the outside, obviously, that's a whole nother skill set on teaching and kind of learning how to work with individuals that you could take from your past experience and apply it to the team atmosphere, but that's a whole nother bag of worms. But in that same vein, we jump into the last season of Contenders season 2 for North America, where you were signed with XL2. First, I want to kind of get your thoughts on, you know, how did that come about? How did they reach out? Did you reach out? How did that kind of interaction, if you could talk about that a little bit?
It's actually a very interesting story. I'm gonna keep it short. Someone ordered a coaching session. He wasn't super high rated, but he also wasn't super. He was like, okay, it's always tough saying he wasn't super high rated and then saying that he was like 4.1k,
right?
Because it's all relative. He was, you know, a grandmaster player, but he wasn't anywhere close to being a professional. And I did my session with him, just kind of the normal stuff I would normally do. And he knew Kita, who was the coach for XL2 in season 1. And so he recorded the session and he sent it to Kita, and she looked at it and she liked it. And then I was added to the trials that were going on. So I wasn't actually, you know, initially invited to the trials. They didn't have an eye on me. It wasn't until, you know, her friend that I coached sent the recording to her. And then during those tryouts, I ended up being, you know, the best choice for what I did. I was training as head coach. And they liked me a lot. So they decided to bring me on. Unfortunately, I didn't quite get the head coach position in the end. Me and Kita were both co-coaches. But despite that, it was still, I think that's like the general idea of how I ended up on XL2.
That's really cool. Have there, now, from your own personal kind of coaching service, have there been any other kind of strange doors that you could have pursued that you can talk about? Is there any other...
quite a lot, actually.
Interesting.
So you have, on one end you have some people that just kind of want to make their own coaching services. And they kind of, you know, they book an hour just to talk about, you know, business stuff. Pretty much. And, you know, I've turned all of them down because I don't really like, you know, working for random, you know, for those sites. Where there are just a bunch of coaches. I just prefer having my own brand and everything. Then there are also people from, you know, apps, back then Oversumo, which was a stat tracking app. One interesting person that not a lot of people actually know about, James, also known as Cahoodle. He is the, I think he's the CEO behind Pursuit, which is the software that has recently been banned. And he is actually one of my, I guess, biggest clients, because what he would do is he just booked a bunch of sessions, like 4 or 5. And, you know, instead of having me go over a VOD, he would use that to ask me questions about the game pertaining to Pursuit. Right, so he told me about the idea of Pursuit. You know, this was all a long while ago, and you know, I would just tell him, yeah, you know, these statistics are important. This is what you need to keep an eye out for, and all of that stuff. So that's very interesting. So I was kind of with Pursuit very, very early. There's currently some stuff going on with certain companies from Zurich as well. Another thing, this is currently ongoing, so I can't talk too much about it. But a year ago, some people from, I think, the University of New York, I'm not sure, they also came in, and they asked me a couple of questions. So, and that turned into something that's not yet released, so I can't talk about it, but they're using the stuff that I talked about to develop something at the Sciencey and university. So yeah, it is actually surprising how many, I guess, you know, non-coaching sessions, you know, you actually get. It's interesting.
So there's a lot of pins I want to put it in this. So we'll kind of take XL2, we'll put it in a box. We'll come back to that. Don't
Mm-hmm.
worry. We'll definitely highlight that.
Okay.
But you definitely brought up a talking point that I wanted to touch on was the kind of ban of pursuit and visor. You were kind of outspoken on visor and being like, you know, on Twitter, I think you took a recording. I believe it was Jane. And the game basically, or the program basically told him that Barrage was coming online in about 10 seconds. And I think the caption that you had put was like, you know, how is this not cheating? Could you go a little bit more in depth in that thought? Could you expand on that? You know, is this something that we should have in the scene? Is Pursuit, you know, not equivalent to Visor, you know, in how it was handled by Blizzard, and is that something that could be useful to coaches, players, analysts, stuff like that, content creators?
Okay, so I'll first quickly go into Visor,
Sure.
actually. So I do like another product from them called Mayhem. It's a website where you can review VODs. Maybe some players know about it. And I like that a lot, and I've talked to the Zouster a lot. He's the guy behind it. So I like that a lot, but with Visor, when I made that tweet, there are two things that can happen when you try to make a program like that.
Okay.
Either it's going to be not good at all, it's just not going to be accurate, at which point, why would you want to use it? Or it is going to become accurate, at which point, why wouldn't you want to use it, right? The problem is that either it's a waste of, you know, disk space, or it becomes mandatory. There's no real middle ground, considering the feature set that they had back then. And that was the main thing that I was disagreeing with. It wasn't that, I don't think that Visor at that point in time actually gave you an advantage, right? It just wasn't developed enough. It was very, very, you know, early stages. It just came out. What I was really scared of is what is going to become of Visor. What happens if they, you know, because I trust in the development team, like they're good developers, and I was worried what they could turn that into if they aren't being careful and if they don't consider the consequences. So I do agree with Blizzard kind of just taking a stance and saying, okay, you know, we're kind of scared of this. We don't really want this to end up like, you know, because they've had, you know, another game. They've had World of Warcraft, and in WoW, you know, certain add-ons, you know, that people could install, you know, certain enhancements, kind of changed the course of the game very, very dramatically. One specific add-on called Gear Score. I don't want to go too much into what it is, but it ended up becoming so mandatory that Blizzard eventually said, we kind of have to put this in the game now, you know, because people aren't this is like a part of culture now, almost. And there's Dota Plus or something, I don't know what it's called, that does very similar things with enhanced, you know, stat analysis, which is directly from Valve, which I'm kind of critical of. So yeah, banning Visor, I can see where they're coming from.
Okay.
Regarding Pursuit, though, I think banning Pursuit, that was just kind of a, I guess, collateral damage. I don't think Blizzard thinks that Pursuit is super, super problematic. You know, stat tracking stuff like that has always existed. I think they're, again, just kind of scared of the technology behind it. You know, analyzing the screen in real time. And I can understand those concerns. Again, they're, you know, some stuff that we might not think is that problematic. They need to, you know, amplify that by 10, because one small mistake can have a lot of consequences. So again, I can understand why they disabled Pursuit. I personally don't, you know, agree with it, but that's just because I don't know the full picture. Okay, Blizzard is a huge company. They have a lot of research, and they have a lot of concerns. I can understand, you know, they have the reason. That said, I do hope that this ends up similar to how the classic servers for WoW end up, where, you know, someone in the community decides to put them up, Blizzard shuts them down, only to then, you know, a bit of time later announce, hey, by the way, the thing that we shut down, you know, we're going to make that ourselves. So my hope is that by shutting down Pursuit, eventually a couple of months down the line, maybe in 2019, they're going to say, you know, everything that Pursuit did, all of those enhanced statistics and match history, that's something that we're going to be adding to our game now. And if that turns out to be the case, which I personally think, I think that's extremely likely, especially now, you know, with Overwatch League really ramping up. I feel like stats are going to come, you know, it's not a matter of if, it's really just a matter of when. So that's my interpretation of the entire situation. I think Visor ban is justified, and Pursuit they might have disabled. because they have something in the works on their own side.
Okay. Now, I do want to kind of pick your brain on, well, not go super in depth with stats, but I do want to talk to you about stats. But first, I'm gonna go off script here for a second. I do. I've seen a reoccurring theme in the public domain on your Twitter and now a couple times just by talking to you. You seem pretty jazzed about WoW Classic. Is that something you're really
very
looking
jazzed.
forward to? Okay.
I actually don't care about Classic, to be honest.
All right.
I mean, the wall behind me kind of gives it away.
Yes, a little bit.
I'm very much into the game. I'm actually interested in the Burning Crusade most. That's kind of I'm very young. I'm only 20, so Classic is kind of
a little bit.
I wasn't really old enough to play it back then. But Burning Crusade, when I was a young child, that was something that I played with my brother. So it's very there's a lot of sentimental value. And I do admit that I may or may not have played Burning Crusade after the fact on using means that might not have been condoned by Blizzard. You kind of know where I'm getting at.
Yes.
Because I love the game a lot. And
Sure.
so the reason I'm excited about Classic is because if Classic turns out to be a success, I think it's inevitable that the Burning Crusade will eventually follow. So that's why I'm super excited for it. And I think it also it makes me very optimistic about Blizzard, because Classic servers have always been something that Blizzard fans have they've always talked about it as something that's guaranteed to just never. People were joking about it at that point because if they haven't brought it back yet, why would they? So them bringing it out, I think that says a lot about their company as a whole, and that they do actually care a lot about what the community wants, and that they do care about that they not just they can get over pride, which a lot of companies can't really, because releasing Classic, if they thought that there was a huge market for it and everything, they would have done that a while ago, right? So them doing it now because of the petition and everything, they're doing it for the community mostly. And maybe I'm naive, maybe that's a very basic perspective, but this might also go over into Overwatch, because a lot of the design decisions in Overwatch, Blizzard seems to be very firm on. Like they're with the way that stats and everything work, that's just fundamental game design that they've decided on a while back when they were developing Overwatch. But if Blizzard, at least the WoW team has decided that they're going to kind of go back on their statement and say, okay, that was what we thought in the past, but now we're going to change our opinion. We are going to do this. Maybe that also means that they're going to change things about Overwatch, right? And that they're not just setting down this path, that they're willing to kind of take a left turn, maybe retrace a couple steps, change an older decision. I think it kind of gives me a lot of faith in Blizzard, in both the WoW team as well as the Overwatch team. I think that's it's very surprising to see something like that, and I don't know a lot of companies that would do something. I would never see EA, for example, re-release Battlefield 1942 or whatever.
Sure.
It's just because even though a lot of people want it.
No, it makes I definitely have to agree with you there. No, branching from that point, and I won't try to make this a WoW show, but
yeah.
When it comes to that concept of kind of retracing your steps and going backwards to go forwards, has there ever really been a change in Overwatch that you wish maybe we could go back and reevaluate and maybe look at again? Is there anything that kind of jumps out at you like that?
I think one thing in specific would be the in-game competitive modes as of right now, because Blizzard hasn't. I honestly can't remember the last time, and this isn't on Blizzard. This is just on me. I haven't really been dealing a lot with competitive.
Sure.
I can't really remember the last time that there was a really huge change around competitive. And Jeff Kaplan has said that he doesn't really want to add any new rewards or incentives to competitive, and that competitive play itself should be the incentive. And changes around placements and all of that stuff. They haven't really changed anything around competitive, even though a lot of people in the community are very vocal about it. And obviously I understand their decision. You know, they're busy. They're very busy, in fact, with a lot of different things, especially the second season of Overwatch League starting soon. That probably takes up a lot of resources. But that's one of the main things that I'm looking forward to, that they're going to say, okay, you know, there are some problems right now with their competitive mode. And not, you know, they can't fix all of them, because in the end, you know, an online community is going to be an online community. There are always going to be some you know, foul eggs. But I hope that they're going to back on it and kind of revisit their design of competitive and just try to find some ways how they can make it more engaging. And I guess kind of to go back to WoW Classic, one of the main things that was so interesting about WoW Classic wasn't actually the content itself. It was, no offense, it was kind of boring looking back on it.
Yeah.
But what did make that game very special was it incentivized socializing at every single corner. Everything, it was pretty much impossible to get anything done in that game. Even reaching max level without talking to someone else is almost impossible. It is very difficult. And I kind of want to see that same idea come into Overwatch as well. And I think with them introducing the LFG tool, I think that's a big step in that direction. I want Overwatch to have more tools to incentivize socializing and grouping, and to incentivize large communities, especially competitive community form. So, you know, a clan system, coordinated 6v6, you know, a separate competitive queue for teams against teams. That's the kind of stuff that I'm mainly looking for, because right now, you know, especially since grouping kind of screws with the matchmaker a little bit. In lower ratings, grouping up is usually detrimental most of the time. And, you know, that's kind of, you know, that's not what I want. I want it to be the opposite. I want people to, you know, they can play on their own if they want to, but I want the game to kind of, you know, tell them like, hey, you can play on your own, but look at all of this awesome stuff that you can do if you kind of get out of your shell and you start talking to people. Because especially early on in Overwatch, that's kind of how stuff worked. Nobody really knew the game, so people were talking a lot and they were sharing knowledge and they were developing, you know, the scene. And, you know, Slasher was building his little Discord back then, the OW, and it was like very tight knit. But now that the game is, you know, figured out and the Overwatch League exists, and a lot of more players are there, I feel like it's become a little, you know, disconnected in parts. And that's why I'm, you know, I'm hopeful that Blizzard can, you know, move forward and kind of work on those things specifically.
Okay. Last thing on WoW, I you know, I'm a pretty long time player, and I'd like to think I could peg people on exactly what class did they play, you know, what were their interests in other games. And I'm getting a very mage vibe from you, ioStux.
Jesus Christ. Yes.
Right,
okay.
We'll leave that there. We'll leave that there. Now, talking back about Visor and Pursuit, right? What are some of the statistics that you'd wish were added to Overwatch? Is there anything that you as a coach really would love to know, whether it be, you know, the amount of, you know, who you prioritize with Diva Matrix, you know, how often are you finding headshots with micro missiles, you know, what are some of those really niche things that you'd love to pull out of an API that you wish that Blizzard would implement in the future?
First of all, micro missiles can't headshot.
Hey,
they're AoE rockets.
Just saying.
Okay. On top of that, I don't even need those specific stats, because, you know, what kind of damage gets defense matrix, that can be like very difficult to integrate.
Sure.
Actually, maybe not. I'm not sure. I'm not a developer. I quit college, obviously. But even just basic stuff. So just having a match history of, you know, which maps did we win, what compositions did we play on those maps, and when did we make certain swaps, that alone would save so much time. Like, I've been going through a bunch of teams and they all have their own little, you know, Google Sheets of all of the matches that they play and tracking compositions. And, you know, a lot of teams even have dedicated analysts at the point. You know, one person that I know and that, you know, a lot of people potentially know is Danny, who's been signed with Atlanta. And, you know, that's pretty much his job. He's the data analyst. He's the one collecting all of the data by going over the VODs. And, you know, on one hand, it's great that he's given, you know, this job opportunity. But then again, if you think about it, the only reason that this job even exists is because the game doesn't yet, do that for you.
Gotcha.
But again, I think Blizzard knows that. I think that for competitive play, and in the Overwatch League itself, I can't talk too much about it, but I've seen, some of the stuff in the arena. They have access to, a lot more than we do. Not a lot more, a bit more.
Okay.
But enough to kind of show that Blizzard does know that stats are very important. Which is also, why they got Captain Planet. I think his name was on the team for the statistics. So hopefully, all of those tools are gonna progress, are gonna develop. I'm pretty sure that they are already in development, and we'll be able to see those, sooner rather than later. I hope, at least. I don't know anything, but I would be very happy if tools like that existed. Dedicated match history, stat trackers, all of that stuff.
Okay. Now, going back to the XL2 box, we're gonna lift that out and jump back into that. So we know how you approached it. It was a former student message, or it was friends with the the XL2 brass, and they kind of got you in, and they really liked what you did. Can you talk to me a little bit about season 2 and the rise of XL2 and how dominant you guys were, especially in the final? I can't lie, I was not worried. I wasn't concerned too terribly much, but it was close. Me being off in China, learning about Chinese Overwatch. I wasn't specifically invested too heavily in North America, but seeing you guys paired up against the top teams, exactly what went into that, and could you talk a little bit more and expand on that?
So I think the main challenge has been for me personally that getting a visa, takes time. It's just a lot of paperwork and bureaucracy, and it's not really, it doesn't matter how great your organization is. In the end, they can't just give you a visa immediately, right? They need to wait for the government to give you one, which means that I never actually got to meet the team in person until the LAN final.
Right.
So I had to coach all of this time remotely. Despite that, though, I was surprised at how similar the workflow in those teams was to the teams that I've been on previously. So some things were different. We had work emails, and we used Google Calendar and all of that stuff that you would expect from working at a company. But like the actual workflow itself was very similar. You would show up to scrims, you would talk about stuff in between maps, you would prepare VOD reviews, you would do one-on-ones. It was a bit more demanding, of course, because you're working with higher tier players. The competition is a lot rougher as well, which is why during that time I had to put my private coaching business on ice, so I could completely focus on XL2. But it was exciting. We put in a lot of effort. It was a lot of work, of course, but then again, that's kind of the point behind work. You need to do work. So
sure.
But obviously we also had some fun moments, definitely. So yeah, and I still remember when we ended up winning against NRG in the semifinals. That was obviously a very close match. I wasn't super nervous. I'm not the kind of person that gets very nervous during matches. Or maybe I do get nervous, but I don't show it as much. But that might just be because I'm German. But the rest of the team, I mean, you gotta give it to Canadians and American people. They get very excited once. Not as excited as French people,
sure,
but they get damn excited. So when we won against NRG, the screams that were happening in Discord were quite severe. And okay, I'm sorry, I have to do this.
Yeah.
They reminded me a lot of my WoW days. When you finally kill the last raid boss of the tier. Yeah. Exactly. And I was like, damn, that's pretty nice hearing that again. And I feel like that kind of revealed to me why I found coaching so interesting, because the success that you would see at the end after you've put in all of the work, that kind of reminded me of all of the time that I've spent into WoW. And it's I'm not the kind of person that needs consistent bits of rewards or anything. I just want to put in a ton of effort and then at the end, after a month or so, you get like one huge reward that you can be
Sure.
very proud of and very happy. And I think esports kind of gives you, when you make it to the finals for the first time, just the achievement in of itself is quite something. Especially in classic WoW, a lot of people didn't, never actually killed anything
Mm-hmm.
in the last raid, like Ramas. But just being in that raid, like that wasn't, people were happy about that themselves. Like just being able to say that I was in NYXL. I didn't actually kill anything, or I
I
only
was
killed
there.
like one or two bosses, but I was there.
Exactly.
And that's quite something. And it's kind of the same thing with the LAN finals. We got kind of, we got beat quite quite
Mm.
convincingly, but I don't care. I'm very proud of being. I mean, I do slightly care, but it's it's outweighed
Mm-hmm.
by the pride and the positive emotions of just being at the finals and meeting the team, and seeing those practice rooms for the first time, as minor as that may be. It was it's very memorable. um so yeah, and I think that's also the kind of mindset that I would look for in other people,
Mm.
where they don't get super destroyed if they don't get what they want, even if they end up losing, but rather that they just appreciate the kind of opportunity that has been given to them. A lot of the academy players, a lot of the owl players, just appreciating the fact that, hey, we're not really doing as well as we hope we would, but we're here, and we are happy about the fact that we're giving it our all, and we're happy about the work that we've put in, and not necessarily the rewards that we get out of it, because that's kind of the thing about esports.
Mm-hmm.
In the end, there can only be one winner. But obviously esports would be very depressing if everyone except the winner wouldn't have anything to be about.
Now, talking about that final, a lot of people
Mm-hmm.
expected you guys, and to be fair, you guys did very well in the regular season. And yeah, a little bit of stumbles here with NRG, and then going into the final against Fusion University.
Mm-hmm.
Could you talk or expand on exactly what went wrong there? I think a lot of people expected you guys to explode a little bit more, and it didn't seem. Did they kind of catch you off guard with the somber Doomfist? I don't want to get too specific, but
Yeah,
jump
no,
into that.
there's some Doomfist. We knew about there's some Doomfist, like
Okay.
for like 3 weeks at that point. um so I can't talk about everything that went
Sure.
into it, but I think the main thing that I can talk about would be just, if I could go back in time, what we did was, or what I did was, I focused a lot on how to beat Fusion University strategy.
Mm.
And in retrospect, that was not the correct approach, because I would go as far as saying that, skill wise, like if you would assign each player a number on like their raw skill, and you would add it all up,
Mm.
our team, obviously our roster was larger, but just averaging it out,
Sure.
like the average skill level of our players was higher than theirs. I feel very confident in saying that.
Okay.
Obviously they had good players, but overall, I think our players, we had more good players, I guess. So what I should have done is, instead of focusing so much on disrupting them and countering them, what I should have done is realize we can just do our own thing. Why are we reacting to their strategy? We should have just found out what our strengths are,
Mm-hmm.
build a strategy around those strengths, and then just use our raw skill and coordination to force them to play on the back, force them to counter our strategy instead of the other way around. And that I think is a thought process that I'm going to be using a lot more moving forward, kind of working around the team's strengths instead of investing so much time into countering what the enemy team throws at your feet.
So it was kind of a struggle between being, would you say, proactive and reactive, where you wanted to more react to what they were doing rather than kind of playing towards your strengths. That's kind of the
Yeah,
vibe
yeah,
I'm getting.
yeah.
Okay.
That's pretty much, yeah.
Okay. Now, we had spoken previously in an interview with Esports Heaven, and I asked, how or if the NYXL coaching staff worked with you guys at all. And you mentioned that you spoke with Wizard Young, and that's, you know, pretty amazing. Obviously, he's not with them now, and I hope that, you know, he does very well where he's at. But one of the coaches that doesn't get a whole lot of credit is Coach Pavane. Could you talk about a little bit what he does or what he did with your team? You know, what were your kind of thoughts speaking to Coach Pavane?
I respect Pavane a lot because he's not the kind of coach that he does something that I want to do, but that I haven't been able to do yet, you know, so super successfully. He's kind of just the guy that doesn't talk a lot. He just does his work, and he's really good at it. And you know, he's just, you know, he's silent, and you know, but like whenever he says something, you know that it's very important, and you know, he just works. You know, he's just a coach, and he's really good at what he does, and he grinds super hard. Which is why a lot of people don't talk about him, because he doesn't really put himself out there. He's just in there. He's signed. He does his job. And you know, that's what you should do ideally. Whereas Wizard, you know, if you look at the finals, you know, there was the little clip where he kind of talked about his Moneyball stuff and, you know, how he wants to revolutionize Overwatch coaching.
Sure.
He was, because of his better English, he was kind of the face of the coaching staff, and that's why a lot of people, you know, knew him a lot more. So what Pavane actually did for us, and that kind of makes it a little bit embarrassing. He pretty much told me exactly what I did wrong before I did it wrong. He was telling us that, you know, these are your team's strengths. You guys need to play around, right? But then obviously in the end it didn't work out. But I think that's kind of the main piece of advice that he gave us. He wasn't, mainly because of the language barrier. You know, he couldn't always help us. He's very busy. He was, you know, doing a lot of stuff with Wizard. So he wasn't, you know, like with us full time, but he was just kind of giving us small pieces of advice here and there, kind of trying to steer us in the right direction.
Okay. Now, your time with XL2 obviously has come to an end, but you've obviously kicked back up the personal coaching, and recently on Twitter you mentioned that you've been kind of doing some personal consultation with other teams. One that really kind of stuck out was a team in South America. So I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on the region as a whole. You know, a lot of people that I'm pretty close with in Broadcast GG are very, very fond, I would say, of the South American region. You know, what are your thoughts? Is there some talent there that could be scouted a little bit more thoroughly?
There are like one or two good players in South America. Okay, I'm not gonna make a lot of fans or friends with this statement, but in my opinion, not in my opinion, it's just, honestly, it's just a fact at this point. South America just doesn't have that many players. They have a few gems, but those gems mostly come because, you know, they are on the few teams that actually scrim other regions. Most of the other teams in South America only scrim South American teams, and it's very hard to develop as a player if you only scrim teams from your region. One example would be, if you look at the LCS and kind of the early days of TSM, a lot of the teams were moving to Korea and scrimming Korean teams in order to prepare for Worlds, right? But TSM, for you know, financial reasons, for branding reasons, and you know, for all of that stuff, they decided to stay in the US, East Coast, I think, and they weren't scrimming Korean, and that was reflected in Worlds. They just didn't really know, you know, what to do. And I think it's kind of the same thing with a lot of South American teams, where, you know, if since they're in their own little bubble, kind of split off from the other regions, they really struggle growing and kind of learning about the game and benefiting from the shared knowledge of other regions. And a lot of, early at the start of this, I talked about players being worried about, you know, non-essentials, you know, things like sensitivity and stuff. And while the players that I've worked with weren't really, okay, some of them were focusing on that, but there were also like very basic things like blaming your teammates, you know, focusing too much on medals, you know, things that you wouldn't really expect from those kinds of players. I found those things in, you know, the South American team that I worked with, and that was very surprising, because even, you know, tier 3 teams in NA, they're kind of past that phase and they just focus on what's important. but the South American players that I worked with, they haven't yet. And obviously it was only one team. They don't represent the entire region, but the team that I've worked with, I would say, was one of the better teams. And they weren't one of the bottom teams. So yeah, I think those are my overall thoughts right now on the region until the region starts scrimming other regions, which again is difficult because of the ping.
Right.
And international competition starts showing, starts rising up so that they have a chance to face other teams. I think they're gonna struggle for now. The only really good team is Brazil Gaming House at the moment. And from what I heard, they actually scrim teams in other regions a lot instead of just South American teams. And again, it's very unfortunate. A lot of people are gonna tell me, South America has great players, and I think it's a great region. I think that the fan base is there. I think the audience is there. And I really hope that they're gonna get their LAN and everything in the future, because I think that there is a lot of potential in the region. It's just that as of now, Overwatch is still very early. Can't expect a game whose esports scene is this young to have all of its regions developed. That just doesn't work. Most older esports titles, they start developing with the national leagues, and until they actually have an international esports scene, it takes years. So yeah, over time they're gonna get there, but right now it just feels like they have to play catch up a lot of them. Except of course the top team, Brazil Gaming House, they're a little bit ahead of the curve.
Now, talking about Brazil Gaming House, could you see them making a transition the same way that Blake Esports in Australia did, moving to Pacific? Do you see them possibly getting a North American sponsor and coming up and competing in NA Contenders? Is that something that you would suggest, even if that's a possibility? If that window opened to them, would you say, hey, maybe pursue that opportunity? Do you think that's worthwhile?
Teams just wouldn't scrim them.
Okay.
Teams just wouldn't really. I mean, maybe, but the ping is just too problematic, to be honest. Like, there are pretty severe ping issues, to South American teams. And if you have the choice between scrimming, a North American team, ideally on the same side of the country, over a team that's, somewhere down in South America, you're going to choose the local team, because the environment, the practice environment, is going to be a lot more similar to what you'll eventually have to deal with in the tournament and at a LAN stage. So right now, I mean, of course, for them, that would be a really good move, but I just don't see that other teams are going to. It's going to be a lengthy transition.
Okay.
Probably. Yeah.
That makes sense. Now, coming back to NA Contenders, a lot of the thoughts in the community at the moment, the fires of the Overwatch League are being stoked again, and we're getting close, months away from possibly learning a little bit more. We just got the kind of season format, and we had some injection of North American franchises, which leave a possibility of having more academy teams. And the kind of big topic that everybody is talking about at the moment is, the possible expansion, or the, should we or shouldn't we expand Contenders across the board. So do you think that's a good idea? Should we be expanding to fit all of these possible academy teams? Should we do that specifically for NA? Is this a global thing? Kind of a break it down for me.
I think in the long run, okay, so for now they'll have to. I just don't see how they're gonna do it without expanding North American Contenders. It would just be super awkward if we had a bunch of academy teams that are, in open division. I think that wouldn't make a lot of sense. I guess in my opinion, the logical step would be doing what League has done to European game servers, where they've divided it into Europe West and Europe.
Okay.
Like, I don't know, the other European, Eastern region.
Sure.
And I could see something like that potentially happening with NA. So we're gonna have a NA Pacific, and then an NA Atlantic Contenders potentially, when if there are enough teams. and maybe merging them at the end, the top teams of each division, pretty much just expanding Contenders to be a bigger league. Because otherwise I just don't see how academy teams are gonna fit. Now there's only so much space for academy teams to exist, and already if all of the expansion teams are going to get academy teams, especially considering that the Canadian teams are gonna be in the NA Contenders, there just isn't enough space. Okay, so yes, I hope that they're going to expand it. I think that's the most logical step. I personally cannot think of anything else that they can do besides expanding.
Now, you kind of touch on a really interesting point that I haven't heard at least brought up yet, is the division of Contenders, and maybe separating it and then conjoining it at the playoffs, or maybe a final could be the competition between West Coast and East Coast, or maybe even making Canada its own region, for instance. My biggest concern has been the parity of these competitions, because we see time and time again, do we want to see two low teams, two Shanghai Dragons equivalent teams competing against one another? Is that really going to drive viewership? I would tend to not think so, but the division seems interesting. If we were to kind of keep it as a whole region, do you think that that parity question is kind of a worry for you?
One thing I've noticed when I was a part of XL2 was how many people were a fan of me and the team at that point just because we were NYXL's academy team. And I think that what Contenders will eventually be is it's going to be, I guess, Overwatch League Junior, Overwatch League Mini, where it's going to be like the second league, pretty much in traditional sports. And I think that the viewership would be there just because fans of NYXL, like the really, really hardcore fans, they would also want to watch XL2. Or fans of Mayhem of Florida, they would want to watch Mayhem Academy, and so on and so on. And so I think that's not gonna be an issue. What people in the end want is they want competition with high stakes. That's what they want to see. As of now, the stakes in Contenders aren't the largest, at least for now. Again, as I said, the scene is very early. I mean, technically the Overwatch League is still in its infancy, kind of, compared to other more established leagues, although very ambitious, of course. But once Contenders moves up and Contenders is going to grow, and more academy teams are going to exist, I think the viewer base is, the viewership is going to come. And what I would hope, I guess, is what Overwatch is really missing right now, and I guess that's my one wish, my Christmas wish, is I want international competition. Because outside of the World Cup, we do not have any real international competition, unless you count, of course, the Philadelphia Fusion playing against a full Korean team like Spitfire. So I don't really count that as international competition, because in the end they're in the same league. So what I would want to see, and they've kind of dabbled in that in Contenders before, is I want all of the Contenders regions, maybe the top 2 teams to, play in a separate, Contenders Worlds tournament, or Contenders International Showdown, or something like that. Because at that point, you would reach a separate target audience. So if, let's say, the top 2 teams in this case in NA were XL2 Academy, which has its own fan base, people from New York, people who are, for New York Excelsior. You have Fusion University with people from Philadelphia and Fusion fans. They have like their own fans. But once those teams make it into an international tournament where 2 teams from each region would be in, for example, right? This is hypothetical. And let's say one of the teams would drop out of the tournament very early. Let's say Fusion. Let's say Fusion was like the first team to drop out, right? So now XL2 is the only remaining North American representative in that international tournament. And at that point, it doesn't matter if you're a Mayhem fan or a Fusion fan or a San Francisco fan. at that point, all of those fan bases come together from North America, and they would cheer for XL2, right? They don't really care about the team outside of that, but they are the last representative of North America.
Right.
They are the nation's last chance at getting that, that title at that tournament. And I think that's how you can make people, really, really excited, because the potential fan base for each individual team, is only limited to its region mostly. But when you look at international competition, then people aren't just going to be rooting for their hometown, they're going to be rooting for their country.
Right.
And I think that's how you can get people excited about Contenders, when you add international competition. And I think the proof of this, being the case is the World Cup. Because with the World Cup, players from all sorts of teams are coming together. And even if, with Team USA, even if none of your favorite team's players were on Team USA, Americans were still cheering for Team USA, especially with the whole Canada versus USA banter that was going on. So I want Blizzard to kind of look at the success of the World Cup and take that incentive of international competition and that excitement into Contender. As, since they're already kind of planning that with Overwatch League eventually, once we're going to have franchises localized in a couple of years now.
Now, doubling forward from that, something that is consistently brought up is the idea of region locking. People feel like they're being ousted from positions, or maybe they're not being scouted as well as potentially other players are. Is that something that kind of fits into this grand kind of scheme that you've got in your head, or is that something that isn't really a bother at all?
Okay, I think that's like a very spicy topic.
Sure.
Because both sides of the discussion are valid.
Sure.
On one hand, people want the best of the best to compete. If player A is better than player B, he should get the spot. On the other hand, some people think that it's very difficult to, that a lot of local talent is kind of being overlooked, potentially due to unjustified biases. That player B is better than player A, but player A comes from a more well-respected region than player B, so he gets the spot anyways. And I think both of those are valid viewpoints. And I have personally experienced, biases of that sort. I obviously can't talk about them, but they do exist. So regarding region locking, okay, so I'm just going to kind of share my opinion. And it's very important that everyone that, ends up watching this understands, feel free to disagree. Like, this is a very opinionated discussion, and I wouldn't expect everyone to agree. I personally would like to see some sort of soft lock, I guess. Okay. So not, a full region lock, but, maybe teams are only allowed to import 2 or 3 players, right? That way they could fill key parts of their roster with international talent. And there's always going to be a slot on every team for the best of the best. But that way, teams are also forced to develop local talent and to scout local talent in order to fill the remaining slots. So this kind of half-half approach is what I think is the most sensible, especially as the league is going to grow over time. Because I do think that it's very unfortunate that a lot of players that are very, very good and that I would love to see in higher levels of competition aren't being, given opportunities, unfortunately. And we don't know the full picture. A lot of organizations have their reasons on why they aren't looking at certain players, but they're looking at others. But I think League of Legends does it this way, actually. I'm not sure, but I think League of Legends has a partial region lock where you can, bring in international talent, but only to a certain degree. And the majority of your roster does have to be, kind of local. And I'm speaking from the perspective of a coach, of course, of someone that is part of the scene,
right.
And, not someone that's, a fan that's watching. Because I think fans that are watching, the majority of fans don't really care, if the majority of the roster is Korean. They just want their team with their hometown city's name to win in the end. Obviously, there are some people that would prefer more local talent on their team because it's easier to cheer for them.
Sure.
And that's also a very valid viewpoint. But like from someone who's in the scene, from a coach that gets to work with a bunch of players and hear their opinions, I feel like adding some sort of soft region lock is something that, you know, I think Blizzard might want to explore, kind of weigh the pros and cons of it, and see if that's something that they can look into in the future.
Now, when you talked about League of Legends, and from my understanding, I haven't followed the scene in a couple of years now, but last I had heard, yeah, I think it's a two import policy, but they can be grandfathered in some cases where they, if as long as you've lived there for, I want to say it's 2 years, you become a member of that region, and you don't take up an import slot. Now,
I think that's a very sensible approach, in my opinion. Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. Would you apply that to the Overwatch League, though? Or is that something that you would keep just for Contenders?
I think it's something that the reason I wouldn't put that into the Overwatch League as of now is because, and this sounds very wrong and like kind of the other way around,
Sure.
But Contenders, in a sense, is more globalized at this point than the Overwatch League is. Right now, the Overwatch League, since the teams aren't localized yet, is very in, you know, they're all in LA pretty much, and you know it's very American. Whereas with Contenders and with the World Cup, you know, we have matches in Incheon and Paris, in Los Angeles, and all over the place. And you know, recently in Melbourne, even in Australia. So in that sense, Contenders is more international already. So I would expect to see this first come to Contenders, and if, you know, it ends up being successful in Contenders, if people are happy, if competition isn't impacted, if fans are happy, you know, if everyone ends up being happy, obviously, then they can, you know, say, okay, we've used Contenders as the testing grounds for this idea. We think it's successful. And a couple years down the line, once the Overwatch League itself has, you know, globalized, and, you know, we're not just going to see matches in the Blizzard Arena in Los Angeles, we're also going to see matches in Paris and Amsterdam or wherever they decide to expand eventually, then I think it is a good idea. But not right now. For now, it's too localized in America for it to really make sense.
Okay. Now we're kind of coming to the end of the interview. We've covered, you know, the golden path of the division of Contenders. You know, potentially, I would probably say, you know, ioStux is the LS of the Overwatch community. You know, really kind of giving that tough love.
I'm very happy about that. I feel it's good.
You know, we've covered a lot of topics, and we're starting to wind down. And I don't need specifics, but you know, let the people know out there what's going on with you. What's the future looking like for ye old ioStux?
Well, I'm grinding. I'm you know, reaching out to teams, doing everything I can. I'm pretty much doing what people expect. Okay. You know, someone who's LFT is doing. And yeah, I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm going to try my best to make sure that, you know, I'm gonna stay. You know, I'm gonna try my hardest. That's all I can say at this point.
Awesome. Now I'd like to at least give you this last little bit, you know, plug what you got. You know, if there's anybody out there that you want to give a shout out to, any links you want to plug, get them in there now. I don't have a huge platform, but you know, I try to help out.
It's fine. Well, for whoever sees this, I think the only people that I can think of right now are, you know, obviously all of the players that were on XL2 when I coached them. I still think that they're all fantastic players, great work ethic, super professional, arguably more professional than I am. But I'm working on it. And you know, if you know someone in the league, if you're a manager, a coach, or anything, you know, make sure that you give them a second look. Their performance in the finals is not representative of them, you know, as players at all, because arguably our strategic approach wasn't optimal. Yeah, if I don't know how all of the tryouts work, but you know, if there are teams trialing and you're kind of looking at players to scout, I can, you know, wholeheartedly recommend everyone at XL2. Yeah.
Awesome. I mean, I've put the Twitter little link in the bottom half of the video, but you know, if I'm if I'm a gold player and I want to hit GM, you know, where should I type into my search bar to come learn?
Before you go to the search bar,
Okay.
make sure that you sit down, drink a lot of water,
Okay.
make sure that someone is sitting next to you. Then you can go to my website, ioStux.com. And click on coaching. Then once you see the price and you get your heart attack and the guy next to you has called an ambulance and you've kind of recovered after a couple of months, you can consider getting a set.
All right. And that kind of wraps up episode 2. You know, it's been a treat talking with you, and as long as you'd be up for it, I think we could probably dive into a few other topics, maybe further some of those WoW analogies, maybe get a little bit more in depth into that.
Always. I am always down. And once classic releases, I hope that we're gonna get a nice Overwatch competitive community there. It's gonna be great.
Awesome. So for episode 2 and ioStux, we are signing off. Thanks for watching, guys, and remember to like and subscribe and all that good stuff. So we'll see you in the next one.